Hey guys, Lucas from iExplore here, and today I want to talk about two particular ways that I set my camera for different situations when I'm doing street photography. Now, this video is going to be a little bit heavy about discussing camera settings. I don't personally believe that camera settings are the main part of photography. I actually think 99% of photography is not the settings. 9% is about where you stand, and the other 90% is about how you actually see and perceive things. But today we are going to talk about the 1% of the actual technical aspect, because if you don't do that 1% correctly, or you're not sure how to do it, that 1% of photography will hold you back with the other 90%. So today I want to talk about two different modes or ways of shooting that I apply to my camera depending on the situation. So the primary way that I set my camera when I'm doing street photography is on aperture mode, and then I use a minimum shutter speed and a maximum ISO. So to do that, to get there on my Nikon, I go to this menu called the shooting menu, and then an option called ISO sensitivity settings. I go in there. On other cameras, you can get this too. On a Sony, it's called like Auto ISO Min SS. On Canon, it's called ISO speed settings, and on Fuji, there is an ISO menu with some auto ISO options as well. So the major camera makers, I'm sure there's some things on Olympus and other cameras as well, but I'm not sure what the menus are called, but they're probably there. Once I'm in there, I choose the auto sensitivity control on, of course. I choose a maximum ISO of 6400. You could go lower, 3200 is okay, but for me, I find 64 works very well. And then my minimum shutter speed is 1/250, which is a little bit quick, but I find very useful when I'm doing things that are more in action, in motion, and I want to get everything really sharp. A quick little note about Nikon: the regular manual setting, which is up here, the ISO sensitivity, this becomes kind of like a soft minimum. So if you're on auto, try to keep this at your lowest option. So I have it on 100. If you put it higher, the camera will tend to try to use the higher ISO and won't go to 100 unless it's absolutely necessary. So keep this on your lowest ISO when you're using auto. So as you can see in some of these photos, these settings were very useful in this case, because things were a little bit more in motion, a little bit more action-packed, and I wanted everything sharp. So the settings that I used were the optimal settings for this, and that's why I set it this way, so I don't have to spend time setting this on manual in the moment when things are happening very quickly. Quick note about aperture. The aperture, of course, is still a manual setting. Everything else is auto, but this is manual, so I still have to choose exactly what aperture I'm going to use. For example, in a daytime, on a bright sunny day, I might use f8 or even f11, right? On a cloudy day, I'll go down to 5.6. Darker still, I'll go to 4, 2.8 at night, and sometimes even f2. Okay, if I don't have an f2 lens, that's okay, but I try to keep my aperture as wide open as I can when I'm shooting at night, because I need the extra light to come in to keep my ISO at more reasonable levels. That covered my fast mode of shooting, aperture mode and the maximum ISO and the minimum shutter speed. But now I want to talk about my slow mode. So what I mean by slow mode is I usually change to manual, and I keep my shutter speed on a 60th. So it's already there. So if I need to go from fast to slow, it's just one quick click. You'll notice the ISO down here stays on auto, which means I'm still on auto exposure. I'm not manually exposing overall. I'm just controlling my aperture and my shutter speed. You'll see that if I change back to aperture, the ISO jumps from 1250 to 6400, which makes sense because the shutter speed jumps from a 60th to a 250th. Okay? When do I use this? I use this when things are not moving quickly. For example, I'm just shooting like a street scene, or with no people, or there are people but they're just standing there, and I want to, by doing this, I get to keep my ISO as low as possible. So on the fast mode, as you can see, like I said, right now 5000, slow mode 1250. Basically, I save noise, I get more dynamic range, I get better colors, so it allows me to make my ISO lower very quickly. It's also useful when I need to use a specific shutter speed for particular shots, like getting motion blur when I'm doing panning, or whatever it might be, some things with motion. And at this point you might be thinking, well, Lucas, why don't you use S mode? On S mode you can also control your shutter speed, and you don't have to mess around with these two modes. Fair enough, I say, but notice, look at the aperture that the camera chooses. It chooses f1.4. On S mode, it doesn't really worry about what my aperture is. It will have no qualms about going to the max aperture. And I don't like that because, for instance, I might not want to use f1.4 in this case because I need the extra depth of field of having it on 2.8 or something. So in short, I never use S mode and I never use P mode, and nothing wrong with those modes. If you use them, great, but I don't, because I never want the camera to control the aperture. I'm in charge of the aperture all the time because it really affects how the photos look. So those are the two ways that I shoot. I have a fast mode and a slow mode, or at least that's what I like to call them. Now, I understand that settings are not the main part of photography. I really don't focus very much on settings, but I do think it is important to have go-to settings that you can use reliably and consistently without thinking much about them. That's the important thing. When I'm out shooting between these two modes, I can just switch between them really quick, and I don't need to spend a lot of time thinking about them. That way I can focus on the actual creative part of photography, composition, and the vision that goes into each photo, and thinking about what story I want to tell. So I hope I helped you guys get some ideas about how to set the camera optimally for your needs. If you don't use these same settings, that's fine. There's other ways to do it. But if you're totally lost and you're not sure how to set your camera, maybe try these and see how they work, in particular when you're doing street photography. All right, so I hope that was helpful. And remember, always challenge your eye.